Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Abrams, and I am very excited to host today. So, if you're watching live, my one housekeeping note is we will take questions at the end. So, feel free to add comments into the chat, and we will read them off at the end when we have some time there. So, I'm very excited for our guest today, Ralph Macchio. In 1984, The Karate Kid hit the silver screen, and it was immediately clear that the film's influence on pop culture would far surpass what anyone could have imagined. Not only did The Karate Kid spawn two sequels, but its relevance continues to shine in the 21st century with Cobra Kai, which is now in its fifth season on Netflix. Now, in his first book, Waxing On, The Karate Kid and Me, Ralph reflects on a lifetime of walking in the Karate Kid's shoes and the massive impact the movie has had on pop culture in his own life. So welcome, Ralph Macchio, and thank you for joining us.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Very excited to have you today. I read the book, and I absolutely loved it, and we'll get into a lot of the really cool stories you share. But before we do that, I actually would love to hear the idea of tackling the book. So, we're 38 years since the launch of the first movie. Why now kind of the ability to kind of capture this and document your experience?
Well, it is a combination of things. I mean, I've had over the past, I would say, 10 years or so, I've had certain literary agents or publishers say, would you ever write about the pop culture relevance of the Karate Kid? And I guess Carrie always had a pretty successful book with As You Wish, I think, writing about what the Princess Bride was and became, and for fans. And so it was quite successful, New York Times bestseller. So someone probably said, what other pop culture is significant? So I had heard about interest in that way. And then obviously, as you get on in your career, everyone's like, you're going to write a book? Are you going to write a book? And I knew I never wanted to do it with a ghostwriter. I knew I wanted it to be my voice. I wanted it to sound like me. Anytime I've worked with a writer collaborator writing for me, I felt I was doing more work unwriting than I was. So it was about finding the time and everything else. And obviously, with the explosion of Cobra Kai in 2018, 2019, and now in our fifth season, like you mentioned, when we went into the pandemic, so I'm sure there's a lot of pandemic memoirs coming out about now. It seemed like, what am I going to do? Can't go anywhere. We're not shooting. We had finished shooting season 3 of Cobra Kai, and it was not going to continue on YouTube at that time. So we were kind of homeless before the move over to Netflix, and it seemed the time to sit down and write a proposal. And that's what I did. I worked with a terrific agent who guided me on how to all the bells and whistles of proposing something that a publisher would be interested in. And I just went down and came up with chapter names. And it was always about, the Daniel LaRusso of it all, what that journey has been in those shoes, how that's impacted my life, pop culture, ups, down, pros, cons, life lessons going forward, do-overs, if you will, working with, the late, great Pat Morita, William Zabka, then and now, Elizabeth Shue, the behind the scenes iconic moments of the films and other films that I've done as well, and other elements of my life. And it started to take shape. So that was the why now. It was, I had the time to do it. It was in between the success of Cobra Kai and having the uniqueness. I probably should have mentioned this first. This is why it really made sense. The uniqueness of having something as nostalgic as the original film, and the relevance of it continuing to live and breathe 38 years later is not something there are many examples of. So I had that and a wider audience. And so that was, that was the why now.
Yeah, I love it. There is the the multi-generational piece of it, of having the show and the movie and over the course of years. So we'll get into that with some of the questions. I do want to pivot to the book, and I don't want to fully spoil it because I thoroughly enjoyed it and everyone should go read it. But you do cover some really interesting stories and reveal things that I don't think you've revealed or haven't said as much. So I'd love to go into a couple of the iconic scenes, and you can tell us a little bit about some of those things that you kind of got to write about. And so one was the iconic headband, which is a staple of your character.
Right.
And you shared that it wasn't actually something that was necessarily scripted or written in the beginning, and it kind of came from this screen reading. So can you tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it actually came on the first day I met with Pat Morita, who, interestingly, I love these types of stories. Everyone was hesitant, not everyone, obviously, but the studio, the producer, to me, he was Arnold from Happy Days. So when I heard Pat Morita, Mr. Miyagi, I didn't, certainly the way it was initially written in the script, even though there was humor, I didn't know what Pat Morita's chops were as a dramatic actor as well. I knew where his comedy lied. So that first day I met with him, read those scenes, there was an instantaneous, unconditional kind of respect for each other. There's magic in the room. I call it soulful magic, as one of the titles of the book. And it's when I talk explicitly about Pat and that kind of natural chemistry that we had. He took a handkerchief out, which was that headband. It was called a hachimaki. And the whole story is in the book, but it was, he explained what it meant in Japanese culture, and in this case, Okinawan culture, and what it's used for. And then we wound up using it as the handkerchief to touch on Daniel's bruises in the scene post Halloween dance fight when he gets his butt kicked.
Yeah.
And then it was something we added for him to be putting on his forehead, and it was about, when are we doing that? And we all loved the idea because it was such significance for a teacher to give to a student. But then it wound up being anytime he was training. Anytime he was training was when he wore it, and of course in the tournament. And there, that's as much pop culture as my face at that time. It was the headband,
Yeah.
and they're making them now and selling them for Christmas. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, it's become kind of a staple of your character and
Yeah.
a big piece. And it's kind of interesting to hear that it's something that was part of this very first interaction. And it probably
Mhm.
it says a lot about your relationship with,
Yeah.
that started with Pat and how it's evolved.
Yeah, for sure.
There's another kind of Pat related scene that is talked about in the book that I don't think a lot of people recognize. And you wrote a lot about your experience with it, and that's the internment camps, the Japanese internment camp
Mhm.
scenes that he fought to keep in, and
Yeah.
that's such a powerful moment in the movie. What was that like for you on your side, hearing his experience and his kind of passion to keep that in there on something that wasn't really talked about in the 80s nearly as much?
That's right. You're dead on point. That's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up. I mean, it's a point I always talk about when people, when certain folks would just categorize the Karate Kid. This is sort of pre-Cobra Kai, but in those years where someone would be like, that 80s kind of popcorn movie. It's so 80s, get him a body bag, catch flies with
Yeah.
chopsticks, sweep the leg, no mercy. And I would often mention there's the film worked on a human level. Yes, it stands the test of time because of those pop culture references and the fact that it was that time with the big hair and the mismatched wardrobe, and it was the 80s. But it had these other deeper elements that worked on a personal level. And in the case of what I call the Miyagi drunk scene, or Pat Morita would affectionately call my Academy Award nomination scene, that was something that Robert Mark Kamen, the terrific screenwriter who created this script and movie, and John Avildsen, the Oscar-winning director who directed Rocky, amongst many others, they wrote in this, in this backstory scene of who Mr. Miyagi was, the tragedy in his life, and to let that unfold, where Daniel LaRusso gets to see the human side of this character, and sort of the baton is sort of handed off at that point. One of my favorite scenes in the film, and one of my favorite transitions in the film. But I didn't know much about the Japanese internment camps. I mean, you heard about the Nazi concentration camps, but you didn't hear much about, in the U.S., people of Japanese American heritage were put into these camps during World War II with the fighting in with Japan and the U.S. at that time, and then to learn that Pat spent about 2 years in two different internment camps. I was getting a history lesson as we were doing the rehearsals to this scene that was so emotional. And I write to this in the book. to how much at that time, how the double meaning of all this must have been to him, that I don't even think I gathered as much then as I did when I was writing it now. You know, because I've lived life, you know, longer at that point. Youth is wasted on the young. I think
Yeah.
I've written that once or twice in the book. But it was really the poignancy of that and the importance of it, and the fact that that film is the first mainstream Hollywood movie to ever touch on that subject matter is, you know, I'm proud to be a part of that, even though I was merely, you know, just the guy who got the part, who played the kid in the Karate Kid. So I'm glad you brought that up, because it speaks to some of the depth that I try to layer into this book, which is pretty much a celebratory ride through this amazing journey.
Yeah, and you get to tackle it, you know, from this perspective in life versus the 22-year-old
Exactly.
that did it, which is what made, you know, kind of reflecting on this and reading it such a fascinating read, is to get to hear that version. And for the Cobra Kai fans, the, you know,
Yeah.
the adult parent Daniel LaRusso version as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other iconic scene that, you know, you kind of go into detail on is the crane kick and how you shot
Yeah.
it. And can you tell us a little bit about like that whole process? Because I mean, it's kind of fascinating to read. But what was your experience in the moment of, you know, did you know that was going to be this, you know, that's going to be the iconic moment of this of the franchise that everyone's going to kind of keep to?
When we were shooting it, I didn't know. And listen, I didn't know the movie was going to
Yeah,
be any good. You know, you never know. You always have hopes that you're making the greatest piece of cinema in the history
yeah,
of the world, and that's not always the case. And certainly you don't predict that 38 years later, it's as relevant as it ever was. That's
yeah,
beyond no one. You just can't predict that. But the crane kick, we knew it was that cinematic piece of magic. It's like when Mr. Miyagi could to his hands and make all the pain go away. I could use that now at my age. I need that every
yeah.
morning. But you know, it had a very cinematic look. It was bird-like. It was very Okinawan. It was about finding the balance so you could throw the kick, and in that case, protecting the wounded leg. And you know, it was beautifully written by Robert Kamen for sure. But it was exactly that. It was written. Okay, so how do you do it? You know, and it was not so easy to pull off as scripted, and it took a lot of work by a lot of different people, martial artists and stunt people, and to sort of figure out a way to deliver on the promise on the page and it be something that would stick. I mean, as it stuck, it's incredible. You know, listen, I every day of my life someone's asking me to do it. You know,
Yeah. As I
I'd be
say, we're not.
for the rest of my life if I said yes to you, is what I say to them. But it's you know, where we really knew it, and I write to this in the introductory story, is when I first walked out of a packed movie theater after seeing that film for the first time, and on the, you know, in the parking lot on the side of the street, everybody's doing their version of the Mr. Miyagi's crane kick, and you know, whether they were 10 years old or 72 years old, everyone was taking that position, and that's kind of, you know, you might have something, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's what one thing that when I was reading that I didn't know is that it was originally it was a 3 movie deal to begin with. And so
Yeah.
maybe there was a, you know, that they knew, somebody knew to have the forethought to sign on to this 3
Yeah,
movie
that
deal.
was a good point. That was early on when the studios started to get way early on. Studios started to get hip that this is something that if it plays out, we'd like to make sure we don't have to, you know, mortgage the house to get them back for another one. You know, it was right. I guess, you know, Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, all that stuff. It was Indiana Jones. It was,
Mhm.
you know, um, so the Karate Kid was a three-picture deal at the time. I mean, it was, you know, we tried to make it just one at that time. You always want more leverage, but I wasn't in a position
Yeah.
to warrant that. And listen, it certainly paid off, but yeah, you know, they had a feeling. I mean, the script was good. It's just whether it was going to be, you know, magical, and you don't kind of know that till you get all the pieces put together.
Yeah, and you do cover the whole kind of 80s genre in the book and about how there's the John Hugheses and 16 Candles and some of these other ones. And so you kind of don't know, but by having that three picture deal, did that influence some of the other things you thought about doing in the 80s in that kind of era when you had those other opportunities?
Yeah, that's a good question as well, because having a picture deal at that time did block out other opportunities because I had the second option. It's certainly with the third option. And by then I had shot two of the Karate Kid films. So I had felt I've kind of gone down the LaRusso path, and the
Mhm.
Karate Kid Part 3, even before the script came in, which, I've gone on record and I even write to this, I felt it was kind of a step backwards for the
Mhm.
character. We could fast forward to now what Karate Kid 3 has given to Cobra Kai. So it's that I love writing to that, because be careful what you think, because in years
Yeah.
to come, something that might be a shortcoming may actually bear more fruit than you could imagine. And that is the case. So
Mhm.
I'm super glad that movie happened, even though at the time it got in the way of some other films I wanted to do, or some other opportunities. And then you look at when another project presented itself, all of a sudden they'd want three pictures there. Like Back to the Future is something I wrote about, because there was a general consensus that I passed on doing Back to the Future, and that was not the case. I mean, I did meet on that, and there were discussions, and I
Mhm.
write very carefully and believably that when in success, the right guy got the right part. I mean, Marty
Mhm.
McFly is Michael J. Fox. Like I say, Ferris Bueller is Matthew Broderick. And so maybe Daniel LaRusso is Ralph Macchio. That's kind of when things succeed, it usually pans out that the right pieces were put together. But with Back to the Future, that was going to be another multi-picture deal. But
Mhm.
it was two different studios, and you know, um, it was casting at the time, and the all-American factor of Marty McFly, and so they have to. I can't talk too much. They got to read the book or get the audio book.
Yeah,
Good story
absolutely.
about all that stuff, and that time in the '80s, and why I never got to be in the Brat Pack, or not. That's not a ticket I needed to get. So
Yeah.
fun stories.
So one thing that you do go into detail on is your relationships with especially the early stages of meeting the other actors from the franchise.
Mhm.
What was it like for you reflecting back 30 years later on those immediate moments of the first interactions, especially since you're getting the chance to still work with some of them today?
Yeah, that's why I speak to the uniqueness I meant earlier.
Mhm.
I said earlier about having, it's interesting writing this book. There were times when my editor would say, "Okay, we're going to lock the manuscript," which you never want to do, because you want to change that, put a comma here, put an emphasis there. But this was extra difficult, because I was shooting scenes. I'll give you an example. I'm shooting scenes in season 5 of Cobra Kai with the great Yuji Okamoto, who plays Chosen. And if you've seen season 5, he's like one of the MVPs of the season. Um, and I wrote during season 4 is probably when I wrote the lion's share of the book, which was 8 months prior. And I wrote a simple description of his character from the original Karate Kid Part 2, and how he does a 180 and redeems himself and informs LaRusso going forward and today. But then there was so much more to say, because there was so much more being written. And I learned that Cobra Kai 5 was going to come out before the book. So I said, we got to change that. No, hold the presses or stop the presses. We have more to do. It's just interesting to it's still living and breathing. But to work with Elizabeth Shue back in 1983, and not having seen her for so many years, just because our lives went in different directions, and work and family and everything else, and then to come back to that and have that chemistry, it was instantaneous. Certainly with Billy as well, with William Zabka, who is my partner in streaming heaven, right? It's just, who knew that the guy who kicked my ass every day would turn out to be, his wonderful ally in the 2020, 2018. It's just really quite wonderful. And every actor from the OG team, the Tamlin, Tomita, or Yuji, like I mentioned,
Mhm.
Thomas Ian Griffith, Terry Silver. I could go on and on. Lisa Shu, obviously. They come back and they knock it out of the park. And the writing team on Cobra Kai, a lot of credit is deserved there, because they don't just say come back and do a one joke off. They give them backstories and what has happened in these 30 years to all these people, and so you get to play scenes you never thought you would. And that's, I write to that as well in the book, certainly in the second half of it, as to how rich and rewarding that journey is.
Yeah, I think it's a good transition to talking about Cobra Kai, but I also would, I will say when you do the second and third editions of your book, you got new chapters now ready to write, so you'll be able to keep adding to it.
Okay.
Let's shift to Cobra Kai, because it's a massive hit on Netflix, but it seems like it took a while for you to embrace kind of bringing back that Daniel LaRusso character.
Mhm.
And so, what was kind of the moment for you where you said, "Okay, I'm ready to tackle this project"? And what were the things that you wanted to make sure you preserved in the legacy of the originals?
Yeah, thank you. I've been pitched this. I don't want to say them all because there's some really funny pitches that I've heard over the years on how to reignite the Karate Kid franchise in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s. And they're pretty entertaining and funny to
Yeah.
listen to. So um, I just always listen. When Pat Morita passed, it's been a long time now. So it I didn't have the partner that created the music, for what the Karate Kid
Mhm.
was, and that's the secret sauce, if you will, to what the Karate Kid is in Mr. Miyagi, that sort of magical character. So it was always easier to say no to wanting to reboot where Daniel LaRusso is now, when I didn't have that side of it. I'd spoken to Billy Zabka over the years. He had certain ideas, but nothing ever came to fruition as far as the Daniel and Johnny of it all. Um, what happened is the movie Creed was out, which
Mhm.
really was a kind of smart way into the Rocky universe without making Rocky 7 or whatever number they're up to now.
Yeah.
Sort of coming in through the eyes of Apollo Creed's son, and then Stallone comes in as you know. Uh, as Balboa, as we know him.
Mhm.
So once I met with John, Josh, and Hayden, and the guys who wrote Hot Tub Time Machine, and Harold and Kumar, and they created Cobra Kai, they were the super fans of the original series. They had an angle in through Johnny Lawrence's eyes, and it just seemed like the right time with these streaming services that you could tell a 5-hour movie in 10 half-hour parts. So it lent itself to diving into the gray areas of very black and white characters. I
Mhm.
still had to hold my breath, and it was quite a, I had a knuckle under with the LaRusso being kind of an arrogant, car salesman, and I understood why it worked. And so it was all about the trajectory and where it was going to go. And it took longer to get there than I expected, as far as where I see where Daniel LaRusso is now. But I just, to me, I had to have Pat Morita's Miyagi woven into the show in some way. And that was always important. And that was always their intention. And, the Mr. Miyagi lives in the series without Pat being here. And
Mhm.
that was of the utmost importance to me. And I think this series benefits from the depth of that, and the yin and yang of, the badassery of Cobra Kai. You
Yeah.
do have to find balance if you want to succeed in life.
Definitely. How has it been to think about these characters, like this world, this that you're living back in again later on in life, and you're almost having to fill in the blanks from the period of time that we don't get information on. Like we have the movies from the '80s, and then we have the current Cobra Kai. What was that like revisiting the relationship with Billy and the Daniel Johnny kind of rivalry, but then furthering along those stories like.
Yeah, that was, I mean, I write to, um, in this chapter called the Zapka Experience, um, because it's so different. I hadn't seen him in 20 years. No, no. Yes, that's correct. I hadn't seen him in 20 years when we finished wrapping Karate Kid, or even Karate Kid Part 2. He had a little part at the beginning. And so being here today, walking, the first scene I shot in Cobra Kai was walking into the dojo, and episode 2 of season 1, walking into Cobra Kai dojo, the newly reopened,
Mhm.
and saying, "I heard you beat up a bunch of kids." And he says, I was beating a bunch of jerks, and we go back and forth between the first time we see each other or the second time in series, and there was just there there was such life lived between Ralph and Billy that we were both connected to this entity for 34 years at that time, from totally different perspectives. One sort of the winning hero, and the other the villain. But we've always been connected to something that that we share. And so when we played the scene, there was such depth and layers of colors underneath the text, that there was a silent conversation we had after our first rehearsal where we just looked at each other, and I saw in his eyes and he saw in mine that, man, we may have something here. This is rich. This feels like putting on a jacket that you wore when you were a kid that kept you warm. It was just comforting. And then I think that's what translates over to the show. You really
Mhm.
care and like these guys. You like them when they're fighting, and you like them when they're hanging out together.
Yeah. And you talked a little bit earlier about having the 3 movies to pull from.
Mhm.
How have you kind of embraced bringing back those old characters, but also you almost taking on a little bit of Pat's role, of the Miyagi role of
Yeah.
becoming mentor and mentee, like that switch?
Yeah, that I love that. That's been some of the richest stuff in doing the Cobra Kai series is sharing with the young cast the experiences from working with Pat and John Avildsen and everyone, Randy Heller, who now has come on to play, she plays my mom. She comes on to Cobra Kai. It's just so nice to share with the next generation cast, if you will, sort of where the magic started, how it happened.
Mhm.
And they all lean in. When I tell the story about Pat and I, or do Billy and I talk about rehearsing the big final fight in the tournament, and you just see everyone lean in. That's also, yeah, informed me to write this book, because I know when I tell these stories, everyone wants to hear more. So I said, wow, if I could just get
Yeah.
my voice into the book. And that was a thing that I believe I accomplished, is it does sound like me talking about these experiences. And so that's been quite rewarding. Other thing that's super rewarding to me is my own kids now in their late 20s. Yes, I don't believe it either, but it's the truth. Champion the show. They cheer it on. They know when the trailer comes out or whatever, they're sending it to everybody, and doing group watches with up in college when it first came out, or now with friends, and so the younger generation, seeing them sort of know who Mr. Miyagi was and know how this happened, or want to carry on the torch. And I have 12-year-old kids. They coming up to me asking me those questions because of the success of Cobra Kai, and then they watch the movie over and over again with their parents for the first time. It's really kind of unique and special.
Yeah, you've got this multi-generational aspect of it now, from being the Daniel LaRusso from the movie to now the father, Daniel
Right.
LaRusso, and you have a father-son duo that's coming up to you and are gonna know you from the 2 different worlds.
Yeah.
What is that like as you go to, like, Comic-Cons and other events where
Yeah.
you get recognized, and it's probably shifted a little bit from the crane kick Daniel LaRusso to now father Cobra Kai Daniel
Yeah, it
LaRusso?
does a bit. I mean, you're not going to top the pop culture cinema of the crane kick and what the Karate Kid was. It's still, I mean, if you have those pictures, it's funny because when we do these Comic Cons and we have like pictures on a table where people could choose, it's still I don't know, it would be interesting to see what the ratio is, but it's about for me, maybe not for everybody else, but if I'm moving, if the people are taking 10 pictures, there will be probably 7 or 8 of the old school Karate Kid with the
Yeah.
crane pose, because there's just something, super pop culture and cinema about that.
Mhm.
But then, yeah, it's fun. I told this story on Colbert on the Late Show. I said it used to be, "Hey, aren't you the Karate Kid?" And I was like, "Hey, don't you play my dad in that cool show on Netflix?" So yeah, that's me. I'm the dad in the cool show on Netflix.
Yeah.
But in any event, it's it's quite wonderful to, kind of be part of bringing joy to people in a time that maybe not so joyful as the current
Mhm.
years have been, right?
Yeah. Now you talked about pop culture references, and there's one I know you talk a little bit about. I want to hear your take on it, of the How I Met Your Mother cameo
Yeah,
and the role reversal for you of being hero to being villain, and
right.
that that angle. Was that the first time you'd really thought about that when that came to you, or had you like really put a lot of thought of to maybe I am the bad guy here in this Justice for Johnny campaign?
No, I mean, I never bought into the Justice for Johnny campaign. I just have, me, myself, and LaRusso won't ever let that happen. But I do smile at the concept. I give credit, and I do this in the book, to the How I Met Your Mother writers' room, that through the Barney Stinson character, played so brilliantly by Neil Patrick Harris, that he would, idolize Johnny Lawrence, the only true karate champion in the San Fernando Valley, not this geek nerd kid from New Jersey who doesn't even know karate, and, steals a black belt with his master just to get in. I mean, all that stuff is it just, listen, for 20 something years, that kept this thing alive in pop culture. There was the movie, and then the internet became the feeding ground for. I would love to find the origin of that first person who typed out or said those words, because I say this as well. I don't believe in 1984 anyone wasn't rooting for Daniel LaRusso in the end. He's the hero protagonist of that story, but no such thing as bad student, only bad teacher, right? That's what they
Yeah.
say. And for Johnny Lawrence, that is, and Billy never played him as a bully or a victim, or as a bully. He played him that he was trying to do right. He was just had a bad teacher,
Mhm.
but he was still kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
That's what I say.
Yeah. I do. We've talked a lot about obviously the Cobra Kai franchise, but you were in one of my favorite movies of all time, My Cousin Vinny,
No.
and so you do touch on a little bit in the book. But I would love to hear what's like one memorable story from shooting that movie, being part of that, another massive hit of a
Mhm.
movie.
Oh my God, My Cousin Vinny is, I affectionately call it the late for dinner movie.
Yeah.
If it's on, you're gonna miss the appetizer at least, because you just keep having to go back to watch the next scene. Performance is great, script outstanding. It was great to have that one on the resume. Um, God, there's so many great memories of making that film, and so cool to be part of another one that stands the test of time. I get that's the story I always laugh the most at, because I get to revisit it every time I watch the film or it's on. Is watching me and Mitchell Whitfield, who plays Stanley Rothenstein, and even Pesci at the time, just not be able to control our laughter when the great Austin Pendleton is playing the stuttering public defender. We just could not. They'd have to cut, because we'd just be doing this, like, just trying not to crack up, because he was just so amazing. Um, yeah, so it's a moment. We're soft and focused, thank God, but it was like the giggles in school, and when the
Mhm.
teacher tells you to stop and you just can't. We were just and watching Marissa Tomei become Marissa Tomei in Funny
Mhm.
Guys. I mean, that was just groundbreaking, career making performance. And on top of that, everything she does is just so, so fantastic. It's great to witness the birth of that, even though she'd done plenty of work before then. Um, that's a good one. The Outsiders is another one that I get to marvel at, being at the onset of all those careers, mine included. And so I got pretty lucky more than a few times, and I don't
Mhm,
take it for granted.
mhm. So we're going to go to audience questions here in 1 second, but I want to ask you one more because I think there's so many positive themes of the Karate Kid movie, especially with Mr. Miyagi, and you write a lot about the balance that you kind of learned at that young age, but that you took into your personal and professional life. What was it like having kind of almost a role where you got to have this like extremely wise mentor at that time in life to be able to take not just from the movie, but also into your personal life later in life?
Yeah, I think, the script, back to Robert Kamen again, the Miyagi-isms and those walk left side, safe walk, right side, safe walk, middle gets squished like grape, which I allude to in the book, being like the only bad choice is no choice. When you waffle in the center, you're not defining or living your life. I mean, these are little kind of pearls, and you could no such thing as bad student, only bad teacher, how,
Hmm.
or from the perspective of what is a bully, who creates a bully, how does that happen, so these are all that's why it's more than that popcorn 80s movie. It actually is filled with life lessons, and ones that I've gotten to take to heart myself. And I really enjoyed when I was writing that, looking at things in my life that I've done, maybe missteps that I've taken, things I'd like to do over. Um, and then taking a lesson, a Miyagi lesson or a Karate Kid lesson about balance and keeping one foot in and one foot out, which is sort of how I navigated balancing with Hollywood and never sliding down that slippery, dark slope. This is the memoir that's non-salacious and doesn't
Yeah.
have the crash and burn to drug addictions to redemption story. I mean, there's redemption in it because there were some years that I was not getting work. I was not having the opportunities I wanted, and I was losing balance and losing focus, and so it all comes back to the balance, focus, mentorship, um, fear being your worst enemy. And we touch upon it in the Cobra Kai series as well, but it was all born out of that philosophy of the Miyagi philosophy, and the life lessons to a coming of age story from a human Yoda, if you
Hmm.
will. Right. And so to use any of those and find parallels, I think any of us could do that. You could do that. Anybody listening or watching this can take one or two of those and apply it to themselves of a misstep or a success in their life. So that's why I think this book, and telling these stories, is kind of a universal look at it all, and not just only for someone who liked the Karate Kid movie.
Hmm.
We'll take it, but
Yeah.
I think it offers, hopefully it offers a wider range of perspective of navigating a life and sort of celebrating, the wins, and because there's certainly, we all slip and fall, right?
Hmm. So we're going to pull up some audience questions here. And so the first one is, you've been a role model for so many people. At what point, at any point, did you feel that Daniel LaRusso had gotten so popular you might not be able to break out of his shadow as an actor?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question, and certainly I touch on that a little bit in some of the middle chapters, the Frozen in Time chapter, the Finding Balance chapter, where I had to come to grips with that all. The character became bigger than the actor for sure, and it became a stereotype is a certain word, I guess, pigeonholed. Where I write about it when I auditioned for My Cousin Vinny. I could not get in the room to be the Italian American cousin of Joe Pesci. I
Yeah.
mean, just like, you don't want him, but really, like, we're not reinventing the wheel. I might be able to pull that off. But it was, I was off the list. I was, that was the Karate Kid. He would people would think of that, and the same thing with the great Fred Gwynn, who played the judge in My Cousin Vinny. To me, he was Herman Munster,
Hmm.
and some people thought that. But as soon as well, not when you're watching My Cousin Vinny, you're not thinking of the Munsters. You're seeing an actor play a role, just like Pat Morita wasn't Arnold in Happy Days as Mr. Miyagi. So I had to go through my version of that. And now I'm still playing Daniel LaRusso, but like Zapka and I talk about it. Billy Zapka and these are different characters than they were, even though it's just different. I'm not playing that character. I'm playing a version of that guy over time. But sure, I'm more open to trying different roles, and hopefully will be, embraced to a point where I could continue to do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, our next question. Greetings from a fellow Hills West graduate. Does it make you happy or sad that you're inextricably linked with Daniel?
Well, it's a pivot on the same type of question. Hey, alumni, Half Hollow Hills West. That's where I went to high school. Yeah, awesome. Happy or sad? I think right now I'd be foolish to say it would make me sad. It's never made me, it created some frustrations when I was trying to break the typecast, but I never poo-pooed on the Karate Kid or Daniel LaRusso at any time. Because I'd have so many people approach me and how that movie meant so much to them, or little kids showing me their crane kick, or someone in their 30s saying this was the movie I watched with my dad up until he passed away. It was our favorite to always watch together. At that point, it became just silly and ridiculous to do anything but be proud of the opportunity I've had.
Mm-hmm. Okay, our next question is, how is your whole experience with the second huge wave of excitement around your work with Cobra Kai compared to your first with the Karate Kid?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it goes to that youth is wasted on the young thing. You expect it's never going to be over when you're 21, 22 at that time, with the Outsiders into the Karate Kid and other projects. Everything was just lifted up so high, and you try to not take it for granted. You try to, at that young age, you try to realize that this is fleeting and embrace it while you have it, but you kind of don't, because you think it'll be there forever. So now it's a greater appreciation for it all, having had it and somewhat lost that level of it, and then having it again. The wine tastes a little bit sweeter and richer the second time around. But, that's what was so nice about writing the book. I get to sort of share the perspective walking in those shoes. And I do remember so much about it. And I'm really proud of the details that I bring into the behind the scenes of making that film. So I get to share that with everyone. It gets, got emotional at times, even writing it, because even for the sake that those years are not here anymore,
Yeah.
But yeah, that's sort of how I look at it.
Yeah. Probably got time for 2 more questions. So bummed that I missed out on the out-of-town production of the Karate Kid musical. When can we expect it to come to Broadway?
Yeah, I think I saw it in St. Louis. Robert Kamen, who I've mentioned 3 times now. So I'll have to let him know I'm talking him up on Google Talks. He wrote the book for it. I think they are securing a theater. Whether it'll be, I think the pencil plan would be either spring of next year or fall. I guess so. There's 2 Broadway opening years. I think there's a lot of components that come into play, but it's really a reimagining of the original film in a musical form that is not a parody. There's been plenty of parody musical versions. This is not that, and I'm just rooting for it. It's just it never ceases to amaze me, the staying power of LaRusso, Miyagi, and company.
Mm-hmm. All right. So our final question is, thanks for doing this. What was it like to work with Martin Kove, who's Cruz, on set? Is he as intimidating as he appears on screen?
He is a teddy bear. He is. I just texted with him yesterday, actually. And I didn't really get to know Marty much in the Karate Kid. Marty, Billy, all the Cobras. I was like, I don't need to be around. Like, every time I'm with these people, I'm getting my butt kicked. Most of the Karate Kid for me was always the Miyagi world, the Elizabeth Shue world, the Randy Heller, the mother and son world. And the Cobra Kai world was the action scenes where I got yelled at and beat up, you know. So I didn't spend that much time or get to know Marty that well back in the day. So when Cobra Kai came about, over the years doing Comic-Cons and stuff, we got more and more friendly, just like I did with Zapka over the past 15 years. And now to see how much care he has in this character, and that he gets to show a little bit of the human side, even though he's diabolical. He's a theater-based guy. We talk musical theater. He's a big cowboy, so he's a big Western fan, probably more than I am. But my dad was a big fan of the Westerns, so we'd have those conversations. And he really cares about the work, and he just is I'm thrilled for all of us, and especially Marty, who had to wait to the end of season 1 to be in a show called Cobra Kai. That he was, how could I not be in the first minute of every show? So he had to be patient, and the writers really do a great job with all of that stuff. So I'm so happy for him and all of us going forward. But he's a teddy bear until he's on screen, and gets that growl in his face. And
there's a good section of the book about it too. So when everyone goes and reads it, you can read about him and the character.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
Well, Ralph, thank you so much for being here and doing this. This has been so fun.
This is great. I thank you. And it's great to, connect with you, and hopefully everyone takes in a little something and goes out and enjoys the book and learns a little bit more about how this all came to be. And it keeps going. So we're hoping to do more Cobra Kai going forward. So keep your fingers crossed.
Please check out the book, Waxing on the Karate Kid and Me, which you can get anywhere. And thanks everyone else for watching.
Thanks so much, guys.